see so many people here. I want to introduce Dwight Holing, who writes the Nick Drake series. And in 2019, I first found out about it when he graciously sent us our own copy. And it's been pretty popular since then. We started talking about doing a program here, and then COVID hit. And so we were closed for a while, then we were open on reduced hours, and we were still not having programs. So this is, I think, our first nighttime program in 2 years. And we still talked about a program, but it was always in the future. Well, the future is here, and Dwight Holing is here. And so I'm going to let him talk about himself and his writing process. And the big question that I have, and probably others do, is how he chose Harney County as a setting. So please welcome Dwight Holing.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Cheryl, and everybody here at the library. It's a beautiful place to be, and especially for a library, because really, aren't they really the beacons of hope in troubled times? Aren't they a portal to the past and a gateway to the future that you can come in here and, dust off a book and explore new worlds, meet new people, and just read. And that's so great. I also want to thank all of you for being here. As Cheryl said, we've been trying to do this for a while, and I'm a little rusty because obviously the last couple of years I haven't been talking in public. I haven't been meeting a lot of new people. So if I fumble a little bit today, just go, okay, he's trying to get the kinks out, and then put a little oil on the machine and we'll go forward. But with your help, I think we can do that, because I am going to be talking a little bit about myself, but mostly I want to hear questions from you, and I want to hear about what you think about Harney County and how can I get information from that. Because at the end of the day, I feel like I'm among friends here, because we share a couple of things in common. One is the place you call home, and I call the greatest gift a writer could ever receive. I mean, there's so much material in Harney County in this area. And for me, that's just terrific. The other thing I think we share is, at the end of the day, we're all storytellers. Whether we choose to put them on paper or put them on an ebook, or if we tell them over the dinner table, or to our friends and our neighbors, we're always telling stories, whether we do so professionally or whether we just do in our own everyday lives. So that's what I want to hear, is a little bit about your stories. So maybe they'll help inspire me to write more of the stories that I do. Also, before I begin, I want to give a couple of special shout outs. One is to Terrell Carpenter, who's sitting right there in the row there. And Terrell is a very special friend of mine because he's one of my advanced reader team. He's got deep roots, family roots here in Burns, but he lives up in Pasco now. He drove all the way down here to be here today to provide a little moral support for me. He's a special guy. He writes poetry. What do you read, 300-400 books a year? Easily.
About?
Yeah.
I average about 300.
And I'm just pleased to be part of one of those 300 or 400. So what I do is I send him an advanced copy of my book so he can read it and tell me if I'm doing okay, if I fell off the trail, if I've got a question or something like what to name a wind or something, he'll be able to provide me that answer. So that's super helpful. An advanced reader team, if you're writing, if any of you are writers, you need those. You just need that feedback, because after all, we're reading for other readers and we need help. And so that's special. The other person I want to give a special shout out to is my wife, Annie. She's also part of my reader team. She's also a muse, but as well as amusing, but she's also one of the reasons that we're here today, because Annie and I met many, many years ago when we were both students at the University of Oregon in Eugene. Now, we lived across the street from each other, but it was a really busy street. And though I kind of saw her over there, well, I blame just the traffic for never going over and saying hello to her. I wasn't shy or anything, but it was the traffic. But one day I'm looking out the front window and a car pulls up and lets her off in front of her house. She's got a pair of crutches and a cast on her leg the size of a cinder block. Turns out she'd broken her leg skiing. I'm looking out the window and I see that, and a couple things come to mind. A, we're in Eugene. We're well on our way to 4 feet of rain this year. It's 2 miles back and forth to campus. No way she can walk it. No way she can ride it. Second, she had this really sharp green square back Volkswagen. It had a manual transmission. Couldn't drive it. No way she could drive it. So I worked up the gumption to brave the traffic, walk across the street, and neighborly knocked on the door and said, I'll drive you to campus. And Annie said, okay, I accept. But I do have 2 things to say. One, I noticed that you don't own a car. And 2, you got to walk the 2 miles to school in the 4 feet of rain. So, well, anyway, it's the one time, well, okay, there's been a couple of other times, but the best laid plans of mice and men worked out. Spring came along, the cast came off, and the 4 race of school got a little further and further until we were going over the McKenzie Pass and in to Central Oregon and discover all the stuff out here, which is so great to see. Now, in truth, both of us had already discovered this part of the world. Annie's a river runner. She had rafted at the Deschutes and the Owyhee and the John Day before I met her. And my folks had a place in Klamath Falls, in Klamath County, and I used that as a base of exploration to go hiking, to go fishing, fly fishing on the Williamson River and camping, got all the way over here to Harney. And so that was an introduction, along with a geology professor by name of Ewart Baldwin from the University of Oregon. He was your typical geology professor. He didn't like classrooms. His idea of a good time in a class was to load us into a school bus with squealing brakes, no air conditioning, no heater in the wintertime, and come all over Oregon looking at stuff. Along the highways where the cuts were to look at the strata and the thing, look at the geological wonders of John Day, Steens Mountain, volcano craters. So got a good sense of what this part of the world was like, and I stored that. And I've used that. Well, I saved it for a long time, but now I'm using that in my novels that I write about. Maybe I'll take a few minutes and tell you how I got into writing in the first place. At the University of Oregon, I was there in the School of Journalism, and I was studying to be a journalist. But the writing seed was planted much earlier than that. And it was either in my DNA or the nature versus nurture. But my grandfather was a writer, and he wrote jazz-age short stories for the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's. And they were witty, romantic pieces. One day he got the call from Hollywood to turn one of those into a screenplay. And they made a movie. He was writing on it with a couple of other Paramount scribes. And it was called The Bride Wore Boots. And it starred Barbara Stanwyck and Robert Cummings. And if you dig deep, you'll find it on Netflix or something like that. But it's out there. And so he moved out to California, Hollywood. So unfortunately, he passed before I was born. But my mom would regale us, my brother, my sister, and I, with stories about him and what he did. For instance, even though he had a new baby, the first time he sold a short story, he used that paycheck to invest in a heavyweight boxer. He was sure he was going to be the next Jack Dempsey. Spoiler alert, the guy had a glass jaw, so that didn't work out. Or there was the time my mom woke up in their Hollywood bungalow, and she's still a teenager, and walked through the place, and there was a gentleman asleep on the couch, and he was dressed in a suit and had white gloves on. Kind of looked like a corpse that was going to be put in a coffin. She's going, whoa, what's this about? The guy snorted, and actually he was alive. And my mom turns out and finds out it's Raymond Chandler, the author of Big Sleep, High Noon, just real famous detective stories. Well, he was working at Paramount with my grandfather at the same time, and he and a few other writers got together drinking gin and playing poker, and he fell asleep on the couch, and that's how he ended up being there. And the white gloves. Well, he was a germaphobe, Raymond Chandler, and impeccably dressed, wore the white gloves even when he typed his stories, and evidently even fell asleep on. Whether he held the cards with him and drank the gin with the white gloves on, I suspect so. So that was another one of my mom's great stories, and it hooked me on mystery from a very early age. Right after I got done with Dick and Jane and the McGuffey Readers, I was on to Sam Spade and Raymond Chandler and Travis McGee and all of those, and probably read them a little too much, but I did manage to get through school and fell in love with that genre of writing. However, at the University of Oregon, I went into journalism because, well, I just thought it was interesting at the time. These were interesting times that were going on. The history of the world was changing, and I got hooked on writing about nature and environmental topics, and best of all, outdoor travel, which took me to some pretty exotic places while I was doing that. And I always kept fiction in the back of my mind while I was doing journalism, and I was also doing some commercial writing at the time, and whatever it took really to, pay the rent and help my kids through school and all of that. But fiction was always there for me, and especially mystery stories and mystery books that I wanted to write. So I plugged away at them. I've got a couple of novels on the hard drive of my computer somewhere that's the proverbial bottom of the desk drawer that never saw the light of day. But they taught me a little bit about how to write, put stories together. And I had a little better luck with short stories. And maybe that was the DNA thing from my grandfather. Although I was writing things that I was able to get placed in literary journals, A, because I didn't pay anything for them, so they always took them. But B, they were fun, and they got me published. Won some awards along the way, including the Arts and Letter Prize for Fiction, which got me down. They brought me down to Georgia to read it aloud at Flannery O'Connor's Andalusian Farm. Now, Flannery O'Connor had been, dead for a while before I got down there to read my story. But I'll tell you, reading it at her place, I could hear her for sure. I mean, it was both daunting, it was haunting, but ultimately it was pretty inspiring, to say the least, to be there. And then I went back to this thing about writing a mystery. I wanted to do it, so I wrote a short story on a mystery, and it was just an homage to Raymond Chandler, my grandfather's old Paramount friend, and I got published. And the editor, wrote right back, and he goes, this is a pretty good character. You should do something with him. You should turn it into a series. And so I did. And his name was Jack McCool, and he was a recovering con artist. And it was all based in San Francisco because that's, I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And so I was able to really explore the Bay Area and kind of have fun with this character and this cast of characters that went along with him that were as colorful as San Francisco itself. And Jack McCool was a great entree into how to write mystery stories and how to write novels. But in the back of my mind, there was always this place, Central Oregon, Harney County, and all of the stuff that was here that was kind of the things that I've been writing about in the journalistic days, about writing about outdoor stuff, birds, animals, wildlife, preservation, looking at the ranches here and the farms and just the sheer beauty of this. It's just nonstop. So put it together and came up with Nick Drake. One book led to the next, written 6. I got a 7th in the works. We were out here this week looking at places where I'm looking for the setting, thinking about it, and it's kind of been nonstop ever since then. Happy to tell you how I do it, how I publish things like that, but mostly maybe I should just take a pause here, and if anybody's got any questions or anything, we can just start a conversation going, because I know that there's other things that you might want to know about that have nothing to do with me.
How many of your books are set here now?
6.
Okay.
Right.
And how did you connect with
Terrell?
Yeah.
I think we connected during the Jack McCool Capers, as that's the name of that series, correct? And we just got to corresponding back and forth. And what a writer needs more than a lot of things is just feedback from other readers and reviews and criticisms. Like, where did you go wrong? Where did you go right? What worked? What didn't work? And he was gracious enough to help me along with things like that. There are other people that I have in that same writers group or readers group that help me, and they span the globe thanks to the internet, from a fellow in London, another one in Thailand, and different perspectives, obviously. But So that's how it gets going.
Is there any similarity between Jack McCool and Nick Drake, is it?
Mm-hmm.
What did you take from one and give to the other?
There are similarities. I try to make them as different as I can. Jack McCool has a little bit more humor going on to it. He's on one side of the law where Nick Drake is on the other. Nick Drake is a wildlife ranger. He's, protecting wildlife preserves and refuges and busting poachers and things like that. Jack, on the other hand, is a recovering con artist, and he falls back on his own ways when he has to solve homicides. And he doesn't have that good of a relationship with law enforcement where Nick does, because Nick meets the local sheriff based here in Burns and falls in love with his daughter. And so there's just different characteristics about them. But I think that's some of the things, the differences are as large as well. Obviously the environment that I write about is very different. Between a very urban setting like San Francisco, where I'm talking about San Francisco Giants on a winning streak and won 3 World Series in 5 years and things like that, talking about all the restaurants there and the food culture and that, whereas out here I'm talking about the burbs. And quick aside here today, Annie and I were driving back from Crane and went up and went north to Harney after stopping along the way, and then we're coming down Harney Lane and went down this one stretch of road, and on every telephone pole was a hawk. And it was just like dominoes. Every time we went by a telephone pole, the hawk would take off. Hawk would take off. And then 2 sandhill cranes flew by, and it was just like, whoa, what could get better than this? Well, sitting on that last telephone pole was a bald eagle. He did not fly away. He just looked at us and said, forget it. I'm not leaving this perch. This is my perch. And where do you get that? You don't get that in San Francisco. So things like that.
So I've read a couple of the Nick Drake novels.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I love them. Really well written. And the Harney County is like an awesome character in those books. Your description of, I could tell that you've been here, but I was curious because, you live in California, how you're getting that, and maybe it's because of your reader as well. But I also wanted to know why you decided to set that series in 1969. So that makes for a pretty interesting storyline, but I was curious why.
Right, good. Yeah. All great questions. Let me first start by saying, yes, I'm not from Harney County. I've never lived in Harney County, though I visited here, and I feel at home here in a large part looking out right now at all of you, because I see a lot of things that we share together. It's just such a great place to write about because every time I come here, and I do, and I usually just slip in and slip out without saying much about it, and I discovered something new. It's just nonstop. I discovered that when we drove over the other day from Boise through Jordan Valley and up through Rome, I'd never been to the Pillars of Rome before. I know that's a little over there, a little east of Harney, but that was great. But on the Steens Highway, it was snowing. It was snowing hard. So, and last time I checked, isn't it May now? I know it's May in California. Is it May here?
Let's not talk about that.
Okay. So we were staying down at the Hotel Diamond, and I woke up in the morning. And there was like, hey, that's a lot of snow on the vehicle. To get to the real question is why did I set it? Starting off in 1968, and now I'm up to about 1974. Well, that period of time is a period of time that I'm familiar with because that's when I was growing up, and it's also a pivotal time in history. So there was a lot going on that was affecting everybody throughout the nation and globally. It was a time where, for me, some of the best music came out of. I still mostly listen to that music from that era. You put on a Neil Young or Buffalo Springfield or Grateful Dead or a Van Morrison, and that's who I know. So I was able to write about something I knew about pretty well, and I could bring that up, Bob Dylan and what have you. And I could talk about the impact of the Vietnam War on my character because he served in Vietnam as in the service, and it traumatized him. And he was heroic in the war, but he was also traumatized by it. And a character has to develop in my mind. He has to grow from one point and learn new things along the way and develop new parts of his personality, healed old wounds, as well as find new wounds to absorb. And so I was able to explore that with him. And it just made for rich material. And that's what a writer needs, is this rich material to write about, because I write whodunits more than I write whodunits. I want to try to explain Nick Drake and the other characters about who they are, why they are, and where they're going and how they're growing. And they can do that in a series. One novel, it's a little harder to do that, but in a series, they've got to keep moving. And it's just that period of time just worked for me. And it still is working for me. I've moved it up a little bit, but in the last book, I jumped it actually 4 years for a reason. But
It was, yeah, I like your, I'm not gonna, I think the character's name is Orville, the
Right.
aspiring FBI
yeah,
agent, or, I mean, the kid that
Mhm.
lives in town or is working for the sheriff's office. So
Right.
that was pretty cool, and to kind of have that aspect. So I did have one other question too, that I think it was The Shaming Knives. Is that the name of the book?
Mhm.
And I was curious how you did the research with the Paiute characters
Right.
in that book. So,
Yeah.
because it felt fairly accurate. I'm not Paiute, but yeah.
When I first started off writing these books, the local Native American population wasn't really intended to be that big of a part of the story. I mean, it's a big part of the area and the whole Great Basin, the Northern Paiute, and the different bands that live around here and their long history. And I knew that eventually I would be able to get into ancient history from that point of view and talk about what Harney used to look like, 10,000, 100,000, a million years ago and things like that. And I had this one character that I first introduced, November, who was living with the sheriff and the sheriff's daughter. He was a deputy at the time, and who Nick becomes involved with. And she just started talking to me while I was writing and started to bring this story to me. And I started doing research on that part of the culture. And the more I got into it, the further I went with it until new characters came along. And it brings up the whole issue about cultural, appropriation. I'm not Paiute. Can I write about Paiute? Is that something that I should be doing? So I have a friend who's not Paiute, but he's part of the Cherokee Nation. And I asked him, what do you think about this? This is starting to become a larger part of the stories. And Robin said, well, are you doing it are you researching it? Are you doing it honestly? Are you trying to avoid stereotypes? Are you bringing it into light some of the things that happen to the Native American population that other people might not know about, whether they're their traditions or discriminations or what have you? And can you help other people that are readers that maybe aren't part of that culture learn something by it? And so that's what I'm trying to do. And in the later books, you'll see that I always put an afterword in them where I'm talking about an issue that I'm writing about in the 60s and 70s and what happened and how that may bear to light in current days. So I think I'm doing that. Am I doing all I can do? Probably not. I try the best I can. In terms of researching the culture, I rely on a few different things. Obviously, talking to somebody like Robin is always great. Reading, like Sarah Winnemecker's, autobiography, Life Among the Paiutes, instrumental. Wilson Weewa's Legends of the Paiute, which is great, and I'll often use what he's written in put that into introduce my readers to those types of legends and those types of stories. And for me to get into the language about it, there's this great resource online from the University of California at Santa Cruz, where they put together a dictionary language, and it was established by some new Northern Paiute students, and so I can use that to try to get some of the language down. I write about the Klamath Nation as well because Nick Drake's partner on the Wildlife Refuge is a member of the Klamath Nation, Loke, and so I rely on the Klamath Nation. They also have a great online dictionary and grammar and things like that to help bring some of that, part to it as well. So for establishing it. My brother lives over in Klamath, in Chiloquin, and so I'm well versed in what going in Chiloquin has a large Klamath population there. My brother actually runs a 400-acre organic barley farm there. So I also get some farming tips from him, so which I talk about in the books as well. So it's a lot of research that goes into it. But that's definitely become a larger and larger part of the stories as they go forward. And it's helping Nick grow too, in terms of his own understanding of the world he lives in here in Central Oregon. Anybody else? I'll go in the back first to beat you by a fraction on the hand. And then I'll get you.
Well, first of all, welcome back.
Okay.
We're glad to have you. I just wanted to know, you said you've done a lot of research with wildlife and so forth and so on. What about your research into Harney County citizens and our culture as human beings, for the personalities in your book? How did that go? What did you do and what did you think?
Yeah, what am I thinking? Well, hopefully I keep thinking. Well, first off, I'm going to invite all of you here. Don't get out of here tonight without my email address and all of that. So you can just write me stuff and let me invite you into being my resources for people and for what you all are thinking. Because until I have lots of people like that to help me, it's always going to be me making it up. But I use the Western History Room and the archives here a lot. Living down in where I do, I can go get online. I can look at stuff. I can listen to some of the oral traditions. There's also a lot of history books. One of the very first things I did was, when I came to Burns, was go next door to the History Museum and kind of absorb that. I can't really talk about what's happening in current day Harney County people because I'm not writing about current day. I'm writing about 50 years ago. Have people changed in 50 years? Well, I know I've changed in 50 years, so I think so. But I get away with it a little bit that way. I read the local newspaper. I read everything I can and I research it. But what I really need is your help to be part of my world, to provide me with what you think. And I'm hoping we will get to that a little bit today. Is if you've read my stuff, tell me if I'm getting it right, tell me if I'm getting it wrong, and tell me how I can make it better, because that would be very, very helpful for me. And remember, most of my readers are not from Burns, are not from Harney County. I mean, I know this is the epicenter for the world right here, but my books go a lot of different places. And so people appreciate it. You have no idea how many people will write me and say, does it really look like that? How do I get there? What hotel should I stay at? Where do I go to see this particular bird? And so there's a great deal of interest in this part of the world. Okay, maybe I helped them a little bit, but I'm not alone here. I mean, I think there's just this rich tradition of storytelling that comes from here. I mean, I've seen, some of the history that's written about, from ranching days and so on. Somebody around here is doing some reading and writing. So that help at all answer? You had a question?
Yes, there's a group of writers here, and I'm always curious, other writers' process. Like, how is it that you put the proverbial butt in the chair and keep it there? And then some writers will write and then edit, and some will just write. and then edit. So I'm just always curious to hear other writers' process.
Mm-hmm. I actually brought a little thing here tonight. I wasn't told I could read anything, but I'm gonna cheat and do that, and I'm gonna get to it in a second. I think it might help you with that thing. And but the way I write is I was trained as a journalist, and I was trained with deadlines, and I was trained with you had to deliver a story at a certain time. I was also a freelance journalist. I mean, very early in the day, I worked for some trade magazines and things like that. But the bulk of my journalism career was writing magazine stories, writing for newspapers, and editing and writing books, all on freelance. Emphasis on the word free. A lot of the publishers and editors think you should do it for free, just see your name in print. But I have a family. And so I knew that for me to get paid, I had to deliver the manuscript. And so it was that. So I'm a 9 to 5 writer. And maybe I'll take a minute to help answer that question for you if I read you something right now. And I might have to read it because this came about recently. I got a request from an editor who's putting together a book. And on this one the assignment was for all, I don't know how many people she has to do it from. I think there's hundreds of us that are contributing to it, to what would you tell yourself as a young writer? You know, write yourself a letter to give yourself advice, what you've learned now. So I took that as a compliment. Oh, she recognized me as a writer. But second, I took it as a compliment. I'm an old writer because she's asking me to talk to myself a long time ago. Which, okay, I own my age, but that's it. But maybe this will help answer a little bit of that question, and then we can get into it, because I want to hear how all you writers do it. And it goes something like this. It's short, trust me. Facts fuel fiction. Characters hook readers. Structure spawns creativity. Deadlines produce publications. Call them simple slogans or maybe even a mantra, but they reside top of mind every time I write. I learned them over the many years I spent writing newspaper articles, magazine stories, and books on natural history, conservation, outdoor adventure travel. When I moved over to crafting literary short stories and crime fiction, they proved right again. Now, spare me the joke that journalism is the world's second oldest profession and nowhere near as well compensated as the first. Plenty of creative juice gets spilled reporting the news, whether or not you subscribe to such journalistic techniques as Tom Wolfe's mau-mauing or Mark Twain's never letting the facts get in the way of a good story. Good reportage has its place in good fiction writing too, no matter the genre, whether it's a thriller, romance, or paranormal. Sure, readers read fiction to meet new people, visit new worlds, and live vicariously, but they also want to learn new things that broaden their knowledge and enhance the way they experience the world. Chiseled on a tablet somewhere is the adage, write about what you know. For me, it was no mystery why I reached back to my environmental reporting days for subject matter when it came to writing crime fiction. Characters, conflicts, and very cool stuff were always found to be in the subjects I once covered. And I learned not only is the natural world a source and inspiration for a mystery series set in the high lonesome of Central Oregon in the late 60s, but also helps lend authenticity to time, setting, and dialogue. Wildlife, weather, and landscape all play integral roles in the arcs of my stories and development of my characters. They provide action, motivation, and revelation. Now here's to your point. To create that takes structure, and there's a double meaning to that. Along with developing a long stories arc, you need to lock in time so you can be locked in with your characters. They can't talk, they can't do, they can't love, they can't hate, live and die if you're not with them every step of the way. In my case, that's 9 to 5 every day of the week, with Saturday and Sunday off for good behavior, but only if I've earned it. Deadlines, love them or hate them, you can't live without them. This is especially true if you're an indie author, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, or if anybody has a question about that. Deadlines go along with structure. Both spark imagination. I'm my most creative when I've got a deadline. Now for me, they're self-inflicted. I say, I've got to have this done by a certain time. I've got to get this chapter done. I've got to get this book published by a certain date. Try viewing deadlines this way. You're trapped in a room.
You got to get out in time, MacGyver it, create it, create the escape. What isn't carved in that proverbial tablet I mentioned is the answer to, why do you write in the first place? Now that's something all writers have to ask themselves, especially if you're first starting out. Are you writing because you want to be a writer or because you have to write? At the end of the day, all writers are storytellers, no matter if the story they're telling is fact or fiction. If there's a story burning inside you, put it out there. And I don't mean put out the flame to the story, I mean fan them, breathe life into it, publish it, let others read it, and then rinse and repeat. There's always another story in there, I'm sure of it.
Nice.
So yeah, I bolt myself to the desk and I just work at it until, I'm tired or we've got a trip line plan lined up or something else comes along. But if I stay away from a story too long, I'm not so easy to be around. I mean, Annie might be able to tell you that better than I can, but because I'm afraid I might lose it, and if you're with these characters and they're telling you, hey, what about me? I got to be part of this story. I got to get in there. And you haven't talked about me for at least a chapter. So don't forget me. So you have to live and breathe with them. And yeah, that's my process. Yes.
So as part of that process, you mentioned the arc of the story. So are you a writer who kind of plots things out and then writes to those ideas and that vision, or is it just a daily ruminating on your characters and what they want to do?
Good question. So what I do is, well, let me start with Nick Drake, since you're living in his world here, just physically you're living here. And after I'd finished the Jack McCool capers, and I was going to continue that on, but Harney kept knocking at the door. This new character kept popping up saying, hey, you could write about stuff that I could do. And I listened to that, and I sat down and I just wrote out five titles. Because I'm from journalism world, and oftentimes the way I get started on a story is think about the headline first. The old inverted pyramid. Give me the headline, put all the news up front, and just work down to the details later. So I came up with these sort of story titles. They pretty much all stayed there. And then the first one, The Sorrow Hand, I write a little page down with the characters. And one character kind of creates another character. Oh, Nick's going to need a romantic, interest at one time. So Gemma pops up. Well, she's going to need, some parents along the way because she's, they're in their 20s, and well, let's make him the deputy. So I get the list of characters, and since I'm writing crime, I got to get some bad people in there too, and I identify them. Then I start arcing out the story, and I just, whatever comes to mind, I write it down in scenes, not so much as a, chapter 1, chapter through 30, but just scenes that pop in my mind that are continuing the storyline, and I very briefly just notes. I don't pay attention to spelling. I hate spell checker on my thing because it's always trying to correct them, but it just slows me down. And I put them all down, and then I revisit it, and then I'll start from the beginning. And I probably spend more time on chapter 1 than I do on any other chapter in the book, because I have to get that flow down. I have to get the language down. I have to get the pace down, and I have to hear the way they're speaking. And that's what I do. I don't know if that answered your question, but there is structure to it. And the story arc is, I'm taking Nick and his friends from here. There's going to be a climax at the top. There's going to be a conclusion at the bottom. A lot of good stuff is going to happen. A lot of bad stuff is going to happen because it's a crime story. Somebody's got to get killed, and something's got to get solved. And at the end of the day, Nick and everybody else has to grow a little bit. And they've got to set the stage for the reader to say at the end of when the last page is done, is saying, gee, I wonder what's going to happen next. Where are they going to take this story? And then I've got to create the next one. So, and the next. But that's what I mean by a story arc. Do all the stories, when I was writing the Sorrow Hand, did I already know what was going to happen in the Pity Heart or the Shaming Eyes? No, but I had planted some seeds along the way where I could take this journey, especially with Nick Drake, of where's the next logical step for him to go? Where is he going to find out more about himself? How's he going to heal as an individual who was dealing with a lot of guilt from something that traumatic happened to him in the war, and sent him on a crash course to, horror in his own life that he was able to pull himself out of with the help of other people. I know all writers do it a little differently, but is that what you do, or?
No, I'm a poet. I don't do any of that.
You need to talk Terrell behind you. He's a poet. See, I'm in the wrong
But I
room
have-
here.
We have a friend who only writes what occurs to her that day. She's not at all a planner in any respect.
Yeah.
She writes for herself, and we all enjoy what she writes. But yeah, she doesn't plan any of it.
Yeah. Gerald,
How hard thinking. You've written a book. You've edited it. You've sent it to your beta readers, which I'm one of those.
Yeah.
They've sent you back the feedback. You're all done. You sent it to the publisher company. But you gotta write one more thing. How hard is it for you to write an author's blurb for your book without giving away a spoiler?
well, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's really hard, and it's the thing that I struggle with the most, because you have to synthesize the entire story in almost an advertising format, where you're selling to these readers what the book is about, giving them a flavor, not giving them too much, establishing an interest. And remember, most books today are just like in the old days. People are going through, they're looking at shelves of book, something catches their eye, or they know the author's name. But now it's even harder because they're doing it on Amazon or Kobo up in Canada or wherever, and they're screening and scrolling. So that blurb has to be very precise. Now, I do tweak them from time to time, and I can figure out what works and what doesn't work. It's really difficult. And oftentimes I'll ask for help on that. Like, Seth, do you think this makes sense? Or, other groups, is this working? Does it fit on the page? Does it fit on that little tiny, postage stamp of a picture on Amazon? Can people get enough out of it? Yeah.
From my standpoint, you do an excellent job.
Well,
I just
thank you.
wondered how you felt about it.
Yeah. Well, I sweat a lot of blood on it. Tears, a lot of tears.
Authors,
Yeah. In the
I
back.
hate spoilers.
Yeah, I know. Everybody does. I'm trying hard not today, because we're talking about a series, and of course I know everything. I could, I'm not saying, oh, what happens in book 6? So when you ask me a question, if I bite my tongue or if I give it away, sorry. Yeah.
The first publisher. How did you get your first book published?
Well, this is great, because I'm glad we got to this, because I hope other people will use this in their own experiences if they're getting published. So that short story I talked about, that I went and read at Flannery O'Connor's joint and heard her ghost, that was part of a collection that I later entered into a short story collection contest from Snake Nation Press. And the prize there was a few bucks, but also they were going to publish it, which they did. And that was a collection of stories called California Works. I think I have 10 or 12 stories in there. Snake Nation published it and put it out there in a very limited edition. And then I got the rights back to it. And it set me thinking of how could I get my work out there along with my books. Now, I had an agent in New York, Jack Scoville, a big New York literary agent, and got a couple of great lunches in New York with him, and listened to all his stories about all the great other authors he was representing. But he never sold anything for me. In fact, I hadn't heard from him for a long time, and I was getting a little nervous, and I called up, and his partner answered the phone and told me, oh, well, Jack actually died a year ago. So this was about in 2013, 2014. About that time, a revolution was taking place in publishing. In 2007, Amazon came up with this little device called a Kindle, and where they could get digital books put on it, and people would buy them and make Jeff Bezos this, the gazillionaire he is today. Well, a few years later, somebody at the old Amazon shop said, well, we should create Kindle direct publishing and let all these authors out there be able to cut out the middleman publishers. We'll pay them a little bit more royalty, and they can publish their own books. And thus, indie or independent publishing / independent indie authoring was born. And that was right after California Works was published by Snake Nation. I got the rights back and I said, I want to get this out here. I'm going to do this route. And I created a publishing company, my own. It's called Jackdaw Press, named after my first dog, and which a lot of publishing company does. Now, independent authoring and publishing is done in a lot of other creative fields. You've heard of indie musicians. I think Portland's full of indie musicians. They probably invented it. Indie movie making, indie filmmaking. They just won a lot of awards at the last Academy Awards without getting slapped. And so, and so the indie word is where you get to hold the creative. Now, a couple of authors really did it long before Jeff Bezos was even born. Virginia Woolf was her own independent author and publisher because she wanted total creative control about what the book sounded like, read like, looked like. And she was able to do that. Now, I'm not comparing myself to Virginia Woolf, but I wanted that kind of creative control as well. I wanted to be able to pick my own covers. I wanted to use Pacific Northwest photographers photographing landscapes around here that I could put on my cover. I wanted to be able to name the books I wanted to name them. I wanted to write the books that I wanted to write, and I wanted to publish them, and I wanted to sell them. And what I didn't want to do so much, but I have to do it, is I have to market them, and I have to advertise them. I had to do all the stuff that publishers, the Simon & Schusters, and everybody else has to do. And then I ended up having to do that myself, which is actually pretty creative as well. There's a whole different sideline there that you can do. The easy thing, of course, is the digital world has come up so much where it's very easy to take your book, put it online, upload it in a software program and download it onto Amazon or Kobo. I actually also obviously print in paperback as well, and Amazon and these other digital to your hands will have print on demand. For my European market and elsewhere, I use an outfit called Ingram Sparks where I can send my files to, and they put it in bookstores. Independent bookstores, like the one just down the street here, if somebody comes in, she can order my book, it will be delivered to her so I'm not cutting out the independent. I'm a great supporter of independent bookstores. Libraries can get a hold of them. So it's really that way to get it out there in a way that gives you control, and just also you get a better royalty out of it. It's faster to market. And a typical book that somebody writes in my genre can be 2 years in the making from when the author first starts it and gets it published until it sees the daylight of print. And for the last 5 years with the Nick Drake series, I've basically been pregnant with a new book every 9 months. So now it's starting to get a little longer, but maybe because I'm getting a little longer in the tooth. So anyway, I think there's somebody in the back there.
I had a question. I do Audible a lot, and you get to pick the reader that reads your book. Because I listened to your book, The Sorrow Hand. How do they do that? Amazon.
I'm sorry, I didn't
You
quite.
pick the reader that reads the book. On digital, on Amazon,
On
Audible.
audio, the voice.
On audiobooks.
On audiobooks, I lucked out on this one. I fell in with a group that are terrific, and I'll sing their praises in a minute. The very first book, The Sorrow Hand, a publishing company approached me, Tantor Media, and they publish a lot of audiobooks. And they said, we'd like to do your audiobook. We'll pick the reader, Steve Marvel, isn't that a great name? He's a soap opera star. And they published it. They pay me a little royalty. They own the rights for 7 years. And being the creative control person that I want to be, I said once is enough. I want to do the rest. And a friend of mine who lives in Seattle had a friend that that owned Cedar House Publishing. Rick Sieves, the big travel guy, he does his books through her, and she had this local actor who's also a voice actor, and he just nailed it. I think he just nailed it with the rest of the books. So yes, I'm the producer for those as well, but I'm not the voice talent. Yeah. And they do a lot of things to, they take my manuscript that I send them, and it's all marked up. It's kind of what you'd envision a screenplay to look like with the actors' cues and everything like that. It's telling Charles what to say and what voice it is, and he's got to keep all these different voices in his head. I think I have a lot of voices in my head. I mean, he's got tons. So he's doing more than just my voice. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Of that 9 to 5 day, how much of it, what proportion of it has to go towards that marketing and all of the stuff that goes with it rather than the actual writing?
Yeah. So the way getting back to that structure thing, is I try to devote most of the time to writing and creating the story and looking at the characters and doing that. And then I leave the marketing to the last of the day. But if I can devote, 2 hours to every 8 to marketing, I run ads. I run ads on Amazon. I run ads on Facebook. I run, ads on BookBub. I don't know if these are familiar venues for you, but that's what I do. I'm always looking for feedback from readers because I get a lot of it, not only from my readers group like Terrell over there, but, from just over the transom, I'm easily found. I put my email address on my book so that people talk to them. So, and I'm constantly adjusting, okay, how can I get more people to look at them? So 2 out of 8, I'm terrible at math, whatever that percentage is.
25%.
So you mentioned all those different advertising venues. Which ones are the most successful for you?
It's changed over time. I'm primarily now I go to where the readers are because Amazon is selling 90% of the books, and I'll put my advertising dollars to them. I advertise not only here in the U.S. but also in the UK and Australia and Canada. Australians, for instance, love this genre of contemporary Western, crime fiction. I mean, we'll look at Australia.
You also have a reader in Barcelona, Spain.
What's that?
You also have a reader in Barcelona, Spain.
Yeah, I know. I don't know where that came from. So. But anyway, yeah. So I'll go there. I for a while I was doing a lot of Facebook ads because you could target audiences and down to only picking people that read a certain author or only people that liked Oregon or something like that. But they've changed that so much now, and I just found it wasn't productive. Plus, it got so cluttered. It's really hard to see an individual ad on that. Mm-hmm. So, and I do some on BookBub, which goes to tons and tons of readers and on that one. Yeah.
Do you find that BookBub do you get a big, is BookBub worth it to do I guess what I want to say?
For me personally, not really.
Okay, it's not for me either. So
yeah.
That's why I was wondering.
What are you writing?
I write kind of like what you write.
Uh-huh.
I have an Oregon Fish and Wildlife state trooper, Northeast Oregon.
Hey.
So crime fiction.
We're not getting out of here without exchanging emails. I'll tell you that. Yeah.
So yeah. So
no way. I mean, that's just yeah.
So that's BookBub. I haven't. Everybody else tells me, oh, it's wonderful, but I haven't had any luck with it.
Yeah, I've put some ads on there. I've done a couple of their deals, but I mean, they're all about readers. But at the end of the day, they're all about BookBub. I mean, it is a marketing arm. They have to pay their employees, and pay the rent, and all that. So, yeah.
They sucker us into it.
Yeah. So, others, yeah.
What about copy editing? Do you enlist anyone to do copy editing on your stuff anymore, or did you ever?
Yes, I do, and I've had good times and bad times.
That sounds like a song. Wait.
Yeah, let me break into it. Yes, I definitely use a copy editor because when you're writing, you can't see the words you've left out. Your mind is just,
Yeah,
you know how
you
it
don't
sounds.
wanna have
You're
to worry about it.
writing it, you're reading it, and then the person you live with will go see it in print and say, hey, there's a typo on the first page and it's already out there. Thank you very much. But yes, I do use a copy editor. Right now, I've been using a gentleman out of Colorado who spent his life writing science, and now he's tracking down, he's retired, but now his whole thing in life is detecting that William Shakespeare really didn't write all the Shakespeare books. And he sent me reams and reams of all his evidence. And he's a great guy, but he keeps retiring, and he keeps telling me the last Nick Drake is the last Nick Drake that he's ever going to do. Before that, I used another person that was good, but copy editing is hard. I understand why they can occasionally miss something. Now, here's the beauty about indie authoring and indie writing. When it's pointed out to you, which readers like to do, you can change it and correct it. And so the next person that buys your book, whether it's print or Kindle or on Kobo or on Barnes, I also sell to Barnes & Noble, through the Nook, I think their device is called, it'll be corrected next time they do it. So that's what I do. But yeah, you have to have a copy editor. That's goes without
Good.
saying.
Good for you.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, please do.
When I read the first book by Dwight with the Jack McCool series, The Sorrow Hand came out, and I read it and I was blown away. I love the Jack McCool series, and I sent him a message through his Follow Me page on Amazon, and he answered it. We made a connection, and I started working with him. This ARC reading thing, and beta readers, ARC readers and beta readers. I actually beta read for him because I get it right after he's got it back from the copywriter.
Mm-hmm.
And then the beta, I write a review, I post a review. If I'm all paid up on Amazon and I've got all my, bought $100 last year, I post to Amazon. I always post the same review on Goodreads. So, everything is there. And I promote Dwight, and I won't mention any of the others, every chance I get. The Sorrow Hand blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. It was the best book in my mind that came out that I read that entire year. And every book that he has published since, including The Forever Thief, right now is number one with another book by another author. It's a dead heat. And I'm going to read both of them again in my mind. But they're fantastic. If you haven't read them all, by all means do so. And I'm sure you have because you're all here. Promote it, speak about it,
Well,
talk about
How
it.
much did you pay him?
Give them
well,
a-
I am taking him out to dinner, so no, thank you. I appreciate.
I am not paid.
Other questions? I've got the high sign in the back here that we're running a little over here, but
Question.
okay.
It's from some people, Valerie and Ed, who could not be here tonight, but they want to tell you that they love their books and wish they could have been here. Their question is, how did you decide on choosing body parts as titles for your books?
That's a great question. I love that question. So remember when I told you that I grew up with the Travis McGee series by John D. McDonald, and he always had color in his Travis McGee series. And I kind of wanted something to deal with the human body because, and all parts of it, from the soul to the head to what they're feeling, because I'm taking a character and I'm growing them, and as we all grow older, some of us start to feel their body fall apart a little sooner than others, but it just seemed a way to identify the series, that I could do it in such a way that they would be representative on that big shelf out there in the world of digital media buying by the reading public, or whether they're getting them out of the library or where have you. So it was an identifying, but it was to emphasize the growth of my character, that this is a character-driven story, this is a character-driven series, and here's a little subtle way to emphasize that, or maybe not so subtle. So now you got to ask me what the next title is going to be. But other question back there?
Great.
Okay. Anybody else?
So should we let him go out to dinner?
No.
No.
So again, I'm going to tell you, I'm completely accessible online. As Terrell said, I will answer you if you write me a letter or just don't call me at 3 in the morning, please. But, and exchange ideas back and forth on if you have questions about the books or questions about writing. If we want to put together a Zoom at a later time, I've actually learned how to do that. And it's not as personal and as fun as this, but it is immediate and it is quick. And we can do that and just keep reading, keep writing if you're writing, keep telling stories. Where would we be without that? So one last little hand there.
So what is your email address?
Now this is a tricky one. It's my first name at my first name and last name.com. So Dwight, DWIGHT, at DWIGHTHOLING.com. 1 L in Holing. So Dwight at DwightHoling.com. And fire away. Let's see each other out there in the story world.